welcome to the ATAR Notes September lecture series. My name is Sunny. I'm really excited to be delivering this lecture to you all today and hope that you find it really helpful for your upcoming exams. So you can see on this slide just some of the free resources that ATAR Notes has to offer to help you even further with your studies, and you can find these on the ATAR Notes page. All right, let's get started. Welcome to the English Units 3 and 4 lecture. So I'll first start with a little bit of information about myself. So as I mentioned, my name is Sunny. I graduated in 2021 with an ATAR of 96.70, and I was the college dux of my school, as well as having completed all three English subjects. So I did English, literature, and English language, and I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Paramedicine at Monash University, and I'm in my second year. So the way that today will run, feel free to follow along as well in the bottom bar which section we are in, but we'll be covering all of your exam sections after looking at some key skills for English. And make sure to utilize the live chat Q&A right next to the broadcast of the lecture to ask me questions. And I will be on there and answering you guys' questions live while the lecture is running. Awesome. So it's not too late to start. You can get good at English. It is quite formulaic, so in a sense, you can even treat English a little bit like maths. Play the VCAR game, make sure you're familiar with what the assessors are looking for and feedback for all of your exam sections, and ensure that you are developing comprehensive plans for your essays because that will affect significantly the quality of your essays, how much you plan, whether you do this correctly, and how much effort you put into planning. So, first of all, the marking breakdown as well for your English study score. As you can see, Unit 3 contributes to 25% of your study score, and you can see what it's comprised of there, which kind of marks. So you might have done, for instance, language analysis as part of Unit 4, but it still contributes to your Unit 3 stack marks. Unit 4 is another 25% of your study score, and that's comprised of your comparative essay mostly, and also your persuasive oral and the written explanation of that. On the exam, all of the sections are worth equal amounts of marks, and this will be 50% of your study score. So everything really important that you're all across all of your sections and you're confident writing for all of them. So there is reasons behind you having an oral presentation, a creative, and that's intended to help you guys and supplement your knowledge for text response as well as language analysis. So let's jump right into it. Some advice for each of the sections of the exam, or I guess a summary of what you need to be doing. For section A, which is your text response, that's going to be based on one of the texts that you studied for text response. So some students actually prefer to write their analytical essay in response to the text that they studied for creative response. But that's optional and that's completely up to you. It's obviously recommended to stick with what you've been studying at school because you've been analyzing that text and interpreting that text, so it's a lot easier. So the whole essay should be exclusively about that text and nothing else. No comparison, no external sources being used, and very minimal background information. So, of course, your socio-political and potentially cultural context is what you will be introducing and writing a bit about and relating some of your analysis back to. So you'll be able to have a choice of two prompts, and you will have to write an essay that forms basically an interpretation in response to the prompt, and you'll only choose one of the prompts. Now, reading and comparing, that's your comparative response, is where you will have to write a comparative essay. So it's different from text response in the sense that it moves away from analysis as much because there needs to be adequate discussion of similarities and differences. So if you currently just follow the block structure for your essays and the only comparative link that you make is somewhere in the middle where you link into the other text, that's insufficient, and you need to be making more comparative links across the entire essay. So also try to, when you individually analyze your two texts, try to have an equal balance. We're striving for a 50-50 discussion of each text. Now, section C, analyzing argument. Probably for most students, you did that a while ago, but many students really like this section. So you're analyzing the persuasive language techniques that an author has used to contribute to their own argument, and we have to be able to analyze both written and visual material. Usually, what you get on the exam tends to be a two-page article of some sort, persuasive piece, and it usually has two images that need to be visually analyzed. So that might not necessarily reflect what you're going to get, but that's what it's been, that task, what it has been for quite a number of years in a row now. So you can know what to probably expect. Beautiful. So, this is an exam revision checklist for you guys of all of the things you could be doing to prepare for each section. Section A and B, you can see because it's based on text, is very similar advice that I have for you guys. So, make lists of key themes from your text with corresponding evidence, meaning quotes. So, you want to have themes, structural devices section. You want to have a characters section and have quotes and mini dot point analysis underneath each and every section. Um, link to views and values messages and authorial intent messages. Have those note pointed as well in your summary notes. Work together with as many prompts as possible. And I don't mean just writing an essay in response to every single type of prompt that you could possibly get, but at least doing a thorough, extensive plan of an essay. um, Make sure that you're able to come up with a contention and arguments for each and every type of prompt you've kind of seen come up on past exams. And ensure you're able to finish an essay within 60 minutes that reflects the highest standard of your work. And constantly, you need to get feedback, reflect on that feedback, make notes on that feedback, rinse and repeat. So there's no point in writing and writing and writing if you don't get feedback and you don't know what to improve and you don't have a look at that before you write, your next essay. If that's the case, you will not see much change. So I really encourage, and you can mark yourselves as well and utilize the examiner's reports to give yourself some feedback, or use your teacher or tutor or whatever you have available to help you get that feedback. And of course, add notes on similarities and differences for your section B. Look for those comparative links, and try to find quotes that can work together across your text as either a link to make to a similarity or a difference. Now, section C is best to read a lot of sample essays. So your exemplar essays often can be found just on the examiner's reports. Review examiner's reports for persuasive language techniques. Make sure that you're able to find the more subtle, more nuanced persuasive language techniques and not just the super obvious ones. Have good vocabulary and sentence frames to have a solid cheat sheet, such as a lot of students write repeatedly intended effect without being able to structure these sentences any differently, and it gets very repetitive and ruins the flow of your essays. um, Print out all of the VCA past exam articles from 2013 because that's just the most recent. You could go back even further and do a plan and analysis of all of those. Try to annotate them, plan for them. You can pretend to give yourself reading time where you can't write, so you can practice planning in your head and then having to write things down. Look for the arguments, look for the contentions, plan for the introduction elements that need to be included. Um, and of course, again, make sure you can plan and finish an essay in 60 minutes that you are really happy with. And you need to include reading time as part of that, where you cannot pick up your pen, because that's the reality of the exam. It is a very rushed exam, the English exam. Wonderful. So I mentioned that planning is extremely important, um, and don't skip it. The better your thoughts and ideas, and the more prepared you are, and making sure that your contention answers the prompt fully, that your body paragraphs relate to your contention and kind of stem from it, that you have a solid, strong counter argument, which should be your last argument in a traditional structure. Your best idea should be your third argument. Having plans is really important. So we see an example of a really, really strong plan here on the slide that I recommend for you to have a look. A decent plan should have a contention, a response to your prompt, as well as body paragraph arguments planned, and you can dot point in short terms evidence, as well as potentially if you think you'll forget a really good idea that you had, what the evidence means. But try not to waste too much time writing out evidence. It's good to just have quote fragments or references for yourself, such as this self identification of madness. We don't have a quote for that, but assuming that you made this plan, you would know exactly what you meant by that and you'd be able to write. So this, you should be practicing making plans, and you should get to a stage where it takes you less than 5 minutes. Of course, personally, I used to have my arguments and contention kind of dot pointed in a bit shorter terms so it doesn't take up so much time, and then I would write the proper sentences, the impressive sentences, during my actual writing time. But I would have all of the key ideas. Remember that arguments should not look like statements, but they should present specific ideas. So, okay, so I want to argue that the theme of something does exist in the text. I want to agree with the prompt. But then, so what? How is the theme presented? Or what are the consequences of that theme being present in the text? What kind of implications does it have to the characters? And these are the kinds of things you need to base your arguments around, answers to these kinds of questions. Wonderful. So let's first start off by jumping into some basic English skills that are important to review. So remembering back to the process of analysis for analyzing argument, it's a three-stage process consisting of the what, how, why process. And this is going to be present, and this is how you will write in all of your body paragraphs. So first, the what is identifying the evidence and the persuasive language technique that the author is using. Um, Use relevant meta language to describe how you would name that technique. We don't want to see just quotes. Um, and attach that to a quote and explain what the language actually means so that you can then analyze it. Following from that, you have to do your analysis. And this is where you can either do the how or the why. Now, the how is basically your intended effect. How is the author aiming to make the audience feel, think, or what is the author trying to make them do? So you might choose to do the how or the why or even both. And then the why is, why does it support the author's argument? Basically, how does it make their argument, or if you might even be thinking through the lens of the whole contention, how does it make it more convincing? Is something adding credibility? How is it doing that? You need to explain. So making sure that we're all across this process. Remember your elements of the of text that have to be discussed and all covered in your text responses and your comparative essays as well. So structural features you will aim to discuss very frequently, introduce quotes for and analyze them. They're absolutely necessary, and students that get high marks have tons of structural features and language devices analyzed, not just plain and simple quotes just from characters, right? So if you don't have a structural features bank for your text yet, now's the time to make one. Look for those simple things like metaphors, symbols, allusions, and depending on the genre of your text as well, look for more specific things. So, for example, film techniques for your films, stage directions, costume for your plays, and have them analyzed and have some evidence ready to put in your essays. Now, characters also act as your evidence, and you will be quoting and analyzing about them. And discuss this as a technique. Remember that characters are not people, they are constructs of the author. So we need to use appropriate language. Not Romeo is some kind of adjective to describe him, because, and then your analysis, but the author depicts Romeo as something in order to create some sort of effect. So make sure you're using appropriate language. Signpost with the author's last name and a writer does word to make it clear for your language that you understand that the character is not an actual like physical entity that lives their own life. So we see this a lot in students' essays, and it's a big problem. So try to get on top of that if this is something that you do. Themes analysis is self-explanatory. That's what a lot of your essays will often focus around. And views and values should be included in the concluding sentences in the last sentence of each and every body paragraph, both in your text response essays and in your comparatives. However, if you would like to score those high marks, if you want to be one of those 40 plus study score students, you need to have views and values discussion when you're discussing evidence occasionally, meaning that at some other point in my body paragraphs, I will choose to continue my analysis even further after discussing a certain piece of evidence that I think is really significant and lead into a message of the author in that extended analysis. So, my tip is to have views and values analysis at least 2 times per body paragraph. If we're talking about the comparative here, a really good place to stick a views and values discussion in addition to the one you're going to do in the closing sentences is right after your discussion of the first text for the paragraph if you're following the block structure before you link to the second text with a similarity or difference. Just have a short views and values analysis of your first text that you discussed. Wonderful. Also want to look for text-specific structural features. So I mentioned that you might think there's not that many, but especially if you're not doing a novel and you're doing a text type, there are actually so many, and you should be aiming to be all across it and have lots of discussion of structural features in your pieces. So, for example, for films, we see things like mise en scène, the composition overall of the scene, costume, lighting, sound. For instance, diegetic sound is the sounds that the characters themselves can hear. They're actually supposed to be in their environment. And non-diegetic sounds is the sounds that only the audience of the film can hear. So that would be, for example, a soundtrack playing over a certain scene. The characters can't hear that, but that's used for us to create some sort of effect upon the audience. So you can see more for plays and novels, and there are really tons. So try to plan and find these in your text. Let's have a look at an example of structural features analysis. So in the play Medea, the crucial conflict is between reason and passion. So Medea is being described as not a woman, but a lioness, with the nature more savage than a Tuscan Scylla's, conveying her dehumanization as a result of her actions. Animal imagery is also employed when the nurse sees her glaring at them like a bull. So this is a simile combined with animalistic imagery that is likening Medea to a bull and comparing her. And we've explained that link really nicely as well. Additionally, we've also reinforced that there's animalistic imagery where she's being described as a lioness as well. So all the animals used to describe her are unpredictably dangerous and aggressive, paralleling Medea's own savage temperament. And paralleling is also another meta language term that is great to use. Um, when we are being made similar to something else, even if those things are really different. In this case, animals and Medea, they would be quite different, right? So you can see a great example of a structural features analysis there that might help guide you as well. So authorial intent really gets the A's. These are views and values messages. I just mentioned previously how you can incorporate more. So feel free to go back to those tips and remember that you should aim to have views and values analysis at least 2 times per body paragraph to make sure that you can qualify for those higher marks. So authorial intent is the author's intention behind their words, quite literally. It's the messages they are trying to convey to the audience, whether that would be past audiences in the time that the text was actually initially produced, or you can also make views and values messages to apply to modern audience, aka you and how you think it's in a nutshell. It can be about how you think the author would try to communicate to you through their text. So need to signpost these with our writer does action verbs such as endorsing, condoning, idolizing. Basically, there's an extensive list of these, and it's not limited to a certain set of verbs. So this is any verb that is as specific and accurate as it can be to what you're going to analyze and say about authorial intent. So try to be very specific with authorial intent verbs, and this is one of the areas in which your vocabulary list you should aim to improve. So let's have a look at an example. Let's say a structural feature would be a metaphor. Then we would analyze what the metaphor represents, but we want to close with authorial intent within our body paragraph and have it a second time. So we might extend further after we analyze the literal meaning of the metaphor into what the author's message in using that metaphor is. Having a look at an example from an English text, let's say that would be the description of the reflections of the Palace of the Republic as bent and brown. Then I might analyze and say that the intriguing nature of the description, and it's linking it to the palace history in East Germany, so link it to the historical context. And through this, the author is suggesting that even after their demise, the Stasi are still bending facts and fabricating fictions in order to seek control over East Germans. And that would be my author's message there, linking in nicely with my analysis. So overall, if you're looking to score highly in English, you need to aim to address all four elements of a text. So your views and values, themes, characters, and structural features. You need to have lots of quotes. A good indicator, say for text responses, to have at least 4 quotes in a body paragraph, but hopefully more if you can combine quotes together and analyze them in one go as if they were almost one quote. Try to integrate and blend quotes into your sentences. They need to flow nicely with your sentences. We don't want to see a quote being separated just into a separate sentence of its own, for instance, and then you go and analyze that. So they need to flow nicely within your sentences. Focus on structural features rather than characters and plot of the text, because if you want to get those high marks, yes, you will have some character analysis and key events analysis, but we should focus more on structural features to add a layer of complexity to our essays. Everyone can analyze characters and plot. Make sure to have authorial intent. Don't memorize essays because generic responses will be instantly recognized by assessors. And answer the prompt. Try not to deviate from the core of the prompt. The core being, what is the prompt at heart really saying? What is it really suggesting? And explore the complexity of the prompt. Don't be too one sided. Centering your arguments on ideas rather than characters or examples is also important. So ensure that you're trying to do all of these things. And remember, we need to have a counter argument, especially for text response. If I argue a specific opinion, I can only choose to be mostly agreeing or mostly disagreeing with a prompt, but I need one body paragraph discussing the opposite point of view and arguing with myself. And this should be that most complex argument that you have. That's your last argument. So, in terms of differentiating yourself, we need to make sure that you don't just use dialogue, the plot, characters, and so on as evidence, and focus on structural features as well. Try to connect everything to how the author deliberately chooses to portray it. Understanding that everything is a construct of the author, and everything, at least according to English teachers, etc., is done for a reason. And carefully describing characters again. I have an example of what to do and what not to do. So, for example, not saying character A is ugly, but rather saying the author portrays character A as an ugly being in order to, what is the effect? Because that's a crucial part that needs to be there. If we're saying, if we want to mention something, it should be a significant thing that we then go and analyze. So, this is a good example to have if this is something that you struggle with. Making sure that we have we really pay attention to how the author describes or portrays the character, and especially look for that vivid description and imagery, and it can even be some at times physical features that depict the character in a certain light. So think about questions like, what does this hint at or imply? What does it tell us about the character? How does it make us feel about that character? And are we made to endorse or support them, or condemn them and disagree with them? For instance, having a look at an example from Harry Potter, because hopefully everyone would be familiar with that. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. So this is about Mr. Dursley, of course. If you, there is vivid description here. There's lots of imagery, and he's kind of being depicted as a man that looks more like an animal almost because he's beefy and he has hardly any neck. So if you think about that, what does this hint at imply? Well, he probably sounds like kind of a lazy person, a person who likes to indulge, right? And uh, not just in food, but in general, indulge. So his appearance reflects that. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much time craning over garden fences spying on the neighbors. So this description implies to me that Mrs. Dursley is someone who's very judgmental, and very non-judgmental of herself, but she fills her days in which she doesn't have much going on, um, being like the surveillance camera of the neighborhood and judging other people, observing their lives, and she enjoys finding flaws in other people rather than herself. Wonderful. And we see another one. You can just have a read of this. I'll move on, but we see this as more of like a mysterious description, and this is the description of Hagrid when he initially appears. So really mysterious. Don't know if that's a good person or a bad person, but like secretive and mysterious. So when you analyze characters from now and always, make sure that you use that appropriate language. We have another example here. So, and what you should, when you analyze characters, don't just not do this because you make mistakes here. You should make references to the way that the author portrays characters and what that means. What is their own commentary on things, and potentially views and values messages as a result of how characters are portrayed and depicted by the author. Now, as part of this, of course, having a chat about character prompts, and you can get these in comparing text, and you can get these in text response. But we're talking about it more in the context of text response. You need to focus your arguments on the broader ideas. Don't focus them on the characters. We don't want to see one character discussed per paragraph. Even if the character prompt mentions a name of a specific character, think about how are they perceived by other characters. Have quotes for this. Have quotes for this from other characters in the text. Think about, is there a character that basically better represents or in a different manner represents the theme that the prompt is about, or the idea that the prompt is about? Because this is what the assessors expect that you will do, and what you will have arguments about. Having a look at an example, the characters in I for Isabel have suppressed their emotions. A bad example of a certain character does suppress them, another one does, however, character 3 has not suppressed their emotions. Instead, having arguments that link characters into themes or views and values, we see a really great plan here. The characters find it difficult to suppress their emotions, and we're going to examine why to make sure that this argument presents an actual idea, and we say that it's because their past experiences have wounded them beyond repair. Um, we also have an argument then around different approaches that characters take to triumph over their emotions. And really, in an essay, we would have to mention in the topic sentence what these approaches are and kind of incorporate them for the argument. And the last one is that many characters are actually able to suppress their emotions to different extents, though none actually 100% succeed. And this is the most our most complicated argument. Wonderful. Hopefully that example helps, and we'll just jump right into text response discussion now. I'm going to have some water. So section A is your text response, and it's an analytical essay on one text of your choosing. I did mention you could write on the text you use for your creative if you wanted to. And the way that your essay is marked is that there are two assessors who both give it a mark out of 10. So this, because the assessors are trained in how to assess you, this mark should be really consistent for from both assessors. Sometimes when it's not, what they do is just get a third assessor to actually mark it as well. So VCOM makes sure that this process is really, really nice and fair for you. There is absolutely nothing to worry about that there might be some bias or anything like that, guys. Now, your criteria for Section A, You're expected to have knowledge and understanding of the text and the ideas and issues it explores. This encompasses your authorial intent, your views and values messages, your ability to craft a solid interpretation. Then you have your development of a coherent analysis in response to the topic. So, a good, well structured essay with lots of analytical links being made that are strong. And again, avoiding things like summary and irrelevant evidence, evidence not related to the prompt. Anything not related to the prompt should not be in there at all. Use of textual evidence to support the interpretation. This is about the quality of your quotes and the evidence that you use. So this is exactly why you should have genre-specific literary devices, analyze structural features, and not just character and plot analysis. And the control and effectiveness of your language use as appropriate to the tasks. So being able to write well, structure your sentences well, have a good sentence flow, using some elevated vocabulary, but still, if you struggle with that, prioritize clarity over the sophistication of your responses. And fortunately, your spelling is not something that's marked, but I do encourage you to write clearly and write as well as possible. So the types of prompts you can really get, prompt actions, maybe how, discuss, do you agree, to what extent do you agree, and why. All of these ask you to do the same thing. Choose a main opinion, have two body paragraphs about it, and have one body paragraph that is a counter argument. Now, how is unique in the sense that it suggests that you have a structural features prompt where your discussion has to focus around structural features. If you take a how prompt and you treat it like a thematic or a views and values prompt, you will have a problem with your marks. So these have to focus on structural features discussion. They will still have quotes and evidence, of course, but mainly looking for structural features, such as having an entire body paragraph for your comparative about setting in the two texts, or you're doing the longest memory and the 7 stages of grieving, and you have a body paragraph around the significance of names in your text and apply that to the idea of the prompt, things like that. Now, you do tend to get one big picture idea and one specific idea on the exam, both for your section A and section B. So use this as a cheat code that I've just told you that you will be able to choose a big picture or specific prompt. Think about what you're better at writing. Do make sure you are comfortable with all prompts, even if you think, I can get away without a structural features prompt. I'll just choose whatever else is there. It could be a difficult prompt this year. It can always be a difficult prompt that you're not exactly sure how to write in response to, and you will significantly disadvantage yourself by not being able to write on all different kinds of prompts. So we've just discussed character and structural features prompts and how to write in response to them, and they really are I would say, especially structural features, is more challenging. I used to always choose big picture prompts, so either around themes or views and values messages, presents a views and values message basically that you want to argue with and challenge in certain ways, because these were just so fun to write on, and they automatically just sparked more analytical ideas in my head and led me to including even more views and values discussion. So I found them to be the most fun to write on, and they're nice and broad. You can develop a very unique interpretation in response to them quite easily. But think about what you're better at, but be prepared for everything at the end of the day. Now, if your essay doesn't match the prompt, there's no point. So do not memorize an essay. I don't care if you memorize an essay for every single theme in text response. It will be a generic response. The prompts are structured intentionally in a way that there are different words within the prompt that needs to be addressed every single time. So you will not get away with memorizing really anything, not even an introduction, because even your context sentence should be addressing the prompt and mentioning keywords. So your entire essay has to answer the prompt. And that doesn't just mean sprinkling key terms every so often because you have a memorized essay and you just stick some terms in or slightly modify your analysis, even though your essay is still not relevant to the prompt. So really avoid doing this. There are lots, instead focus on memorizing quotes, structural devices, analytical ideas for your evidence, interpretations of themes. There are lots of other things to memorize that will really help you and make you an efficient writer and make it easy for you on the exam. So breaking down prompts is what we'll look at next. And I've kind of tried to explain the link between the contention and the arguments and what they need to be addressing, because a lot of students also write poor contentions or poor arguments that don't do the right things. So looking at an example prompt in After Darkness, friendship is the primary powerful force for good. Do you agree? So your what is your answer to the prompt. So this is our contention. This is our overall answer. And I'll break it down in really nice, easy, simple terms for you. It should touch on the key words in the prompt, such as friendship and good, and you would want to use synonyms potentially as well. And it should have your main opinion and mention your counter argument as well. So it's double sided, and this is what a contention should look like. So, for instance, whilst friendship promotes good throughout the text, one must also consider broader determining factors that create good in this microcosm of World War II. Microcosm indicating setting, really great word. I encourage you to use it. So we have that counter argument there, that there are also other broader determining factors. That's going to be our counter argument, that there are other things other than friendship. And then our arguments are our why. Why did you answer to the prompt in the way that you did? So they come directly from your contention. Why do you believe what you do in the contention? And these are going to be your arguments based around ideas rather than statements, and they will form your topic sentences and guide your paragraphs. So we see arguments that we crafted in response to this prompt. One is that friendship allows characters to move on from their past, and that's a way that it promotes good. So we see that specific idea being stated. One is that friendship gives characters the means to consider different perspectives. So another way in which it is beneficial. So we can see we mostly agreed with the prompt, and we only had one counter argument. And this is that exposure to a greater world is actually the thing that allows someone to see their faults in a more definitive light, thus proving to be more beneficial than friendship itself. When breaking down a prompt, these are the strategies you can follow to make sure you develop a strong contention and strong arguments, a good plan, and therefore a good essay. So, first, start by highlighting the key terms so that you can understand what you need to discuss, and don't leave out anything important. Especially watch out for words that are being placed side by side that appear to be synonyms for one another. Because if that's done, they need to be treated as separate terms. There are going to be different connotations attached to those words. For example, is being portrayed as soulless and destructive. We don't want to see essays that only discuss soulless or only discuss destructive or blend these together into one and analyze them as one, because these words have different connotations. So if you get confused on the exam, have a dictionary ready so you can look up exactly what these synonymous terms mean, because you will not get high marks if you don't fully address a prompt. So soulless means someone without any like sort of devoid of humanity, and destructive means destroys things, like what, like relationships, for instance. It could mean different things, so they need to be analyzed as different things. You can also turn your prompt into a question to make it easier to frame than a statement, or if it's a question, turn it into statement form. This helps you actively think about the prompt, and especially if you turn it into a question, it directly prompts you to answer the prompt in your contention. So it helps some students, but not others. I personally didn't use this strategy, but if there are lots of faults and issues with your plans currently and they need some improvement, I really recommend using this technique. And then you answer that question or statement and figure out whether you mostly agree or disagree, and develop your contention based on your response to this question. Then you'd like to play devil's advocate, so question everything, such as, is the theme really the central one? Is there something else? Always ask the question, is there something else? That can make for your most complex, your third body paragraph argument. Look for the implications, causes, and consequences of the question, and this will form the basis of your body paragraphs. Ask the prompt questions, and from that, come up with arguments. So let's have a look at the whole prompt breakdown using this example prompt. Despite Atwood's portrayal of Gilead as soulless and destructive, she has nevertheless succeeded in giving the reader a sense of optimism. To what extent do you agree? So we need to break down if Gilead is soulless, and how is he portrayed as soulless? Where do we see this? Is he destructive? Also, where do we see this? And was she even aiming? Was Atwood even aiming to create a sense of optimism in Handmaid's Tale? Or we can also question, did she succeed? Maybe she tried, but she did not succeed. Or maybe she wanted to give the reader a different feeling, not optimism. So those are the kinds of things we can have for our third most complex body paragraph argument. Let's have a look at an example. Well, this is you see it turned into a question. Surely you can see that it does make it easier to answer. I'm just saying it's not a necessity for a lot of students, but it might help you. And now we're asking questions to come up with ideas for our body paragraphs. So similar to what I broke down before, we're going to ask, is Gilead completely soulless? If I want my argument to be more nuanced and complex, I look for the ways in which he is not portrayed as soulless, but we do see some humanity. Does Atwood succeed in giving the reader optimism? And is this even what Atwood set out to do, or was it something else that the author was aiming to do? Why would it be optimism? What optimism is afforded? How do we see optimism? Why is it there? Is the optimism due to Atwood's portrayal of Gilead, or is it despite the way that he's portrayed that we still see optimism? Obviously, thinking along those lines, it's probably definitely despite how he's portrayed rather than optimism is a cause of him being portrayed as soulless and destructive, right? It seems pretty intuitive. So let's then make an essay plan. Let's say our overall contention will be that Atwood's Handmaid's Tale is a harsh admonition or critique of regressive theocracy and patriarchal hegemony, offering a sense of optimism only in its reformation. So it includes our main argument, and that's basically that we do agree Gilead is soulless and destructive, and that's a male character. So we say that this is part of the patriarchy that Atwood depicts, the where I guess we see men are in power. Um, and an admonition of a regressive theocracy that basically means theocracy is a belief system. Regressive means that it's moving backwards, it's becoming regressive rather than progressive or modernized. And that's exactly, if you've seen or read Handmaid's Tale, you would understand that even though it is a dystopian world that's been created, it's quite a negative portrayal, and it does Atwood does suggest that basically humanity is set to regress rather than progress through the text in the series. So our arguments could then be that Atwood celebrates the endeavor of the human spirit, yet Atwood portrays a powerfully dismal state of humanity. And this is where we talk about how we see Gilead as being soulless and destructive. Because remember, we said that character based prompts should still be arguments around ideas rather than specific characters. So we're not going to write Atwood shows that Gilead is not so bad. However, Atwood shows that Gilead is bad. We need to make these more broad and include other characters as well, not just Gilead, as examples in our discussion. And then our last complex counter argument is that yes, although Gilead is soulless and destructive, ultimately Atwood does not succeed in affording a sense of optimism, as she did not set out to do so. She wasn't. She That's not her aim as an author. Rather, she was warning of the fatality of certain social political values. So this regressive theocracy um, does not afford much optimism at all. It's more of a critique of this belief system that she set out to do, rather than to create some sort of sense of optimism. And here are some of my tips. If you take away anything from this lecture, I want you to take away this: what to do for all of your body paragraphs, because high scoring students often do this unintentionally without knowing that they're doing this. And this is what I did. And this is your cheat sheet. And this is how to write your impressive topic sentences, arguments, and therefore essays. Your first body paragraph could be agreeing with the prompt and showing ways it is correct. This will be the most simple argument that you have, but it is necessary to establish and justify the crux of the prompt. Your second argument can be, however, where you will be showing some complexity by not blindly acknowledging the prompt and arguing basically with what you did in body paragraph one. So you're building on top of your first argument in your second argument and adding that layer of complexity. And in your third body paragraph, you would zoom out and consider views and values or other themes. Is there something that better represents X theme or X character? And this is where you want to flex your knowledge and understanding. So, with these ideas, if it's a character prompt for body paragraph 3, you could look for another character that better represents what the prompt is discussing. Or if it's a thematic prompt, for instance, for that complex argument, you can look for another theme that is ultimately more central to the text or another reason for why that theme or idea is represented. And we've looked at examples of both. Another reason of why Gilead is portrayed as soulless and destructive, because it's a critique of the social political values. An example of another theme that is ultimately more central to the text would be, let me go back quite a bit to go back with. We see this one, this argument free, that it's actually not friendship, but it's exposure to a greater world. There is a better theme that fits what the prompt is asking about. So use this as your cheat sheet, and you see this being presented in a different way. This is basically the same thing. Think about which one makes sense to you more, and you'd like to put in your notes. Answering the prompt itself, tunnel vision, as you can see, that's the same as agreeing with the prompt, showing how it's correct. Then 2, considering a different perspective, however, and 3, exploring nuanced views and values. I do think this one is a bit more comprehensive and easy to understand, and when you read it, remember what it really means. And what not to do. Remember, do not divide body paragraphs by characters ever, because they are constructs. And remember, you can never completely agree or disagree. There needs to be a counter argument. At the same time, you cannot remain neutral. You need to mostly agree or mostly disagree. So we see that there. These are you guys. You're the happy English students that are doing really well at English. You're this guy because you're either mostly agreeing or mostly disagreeing. Okay, and this is where you don't want to be. So be like him. All right. So let's review essay structure for your text response essays, and we'll look at some examples as well. So your introductions should begin with a context sentence that addresses the socio-political context of your text. We do not want to see any summaries about the text or any mention of the author's life or information about the author. So introduce the relevant context of your text and link it back in that broad sentence to the keywords in the prompt. Then you need a contention. We've already discussed how to write a good one. It's your main point of view, your main response to the prompt statement, and your counter argument has to be incorporated as part of it as well. Now, after that, you will have an outline of arguments, which will make it clear what each body paragraph focus will be. Uh, on the other hand, and this is what I used to do, instead of having an outline of arguments, I used to have an extension of my contention where I went into my contention and what my perspective was in more detail. And some students like to do this instead, but make sure you give it a go to see that you're doing it properly and you're still basically outlining the kinds of things that your essay will discuss. And lastly, close with a views and values or authorial intent statement that should link into your contention. And that will be your final sentence for your introduction. Make sure, again, be really familiar with structures for all of your sections so that you can just hit the ground running on the exam and finish your essays in time and make sure they're nice and strong. It should feel formulaic, basically, and that's what you aim to get to. So let's have a look at an example of essay structure. How do the characters in Persepolis demonstrate the impact of the conflict between tradition and modernity? First of all, we should establish whether there is a conflict between tradition and modernity, how it's expressed, and how it affects characters. And we need some kind of counter argument in response to that, such as a potential resolution to this conflict, a suggestion for that. So we see a context sentence revealing the socio-political context of the text, and it talks about the political context mainly. Iran underwent violent and rapid government changes from the Shah's westernizing autocracy to the Ayatollah's strict theocracy, which is our the westernizing autocracy is modernity because it's westernizing, and strict theocracy is going to be our tradition. So we're already notice how we've already applied the context to the prompt and we're clearly signposting what is tradition and what is modernity in this text. And we even mentioned a divorce between tradition and modernity began to accelerate and permeate all aspects of Iranian life. Then we have a contention that clearly answers the prompt statement. So, throughout Persepolis, Satrapi's characters either provide commentary on or examples of the struggle to reconcile 2,500 years of Persian civilization with modernity, resulting in a confusing identity crisis for Iranians on the individual, national, and global scale. So instead of doing a signpost of all the arguments, it's kind of incorporated in there. This is an example of an extended contention. What I suggest you do, though I used to do this usually about 2 sentences and have even slightly a little bit more detail, but this is done really well. It clearly shows that it agrees that there is a conflict between tradition and modernity, that and that it resulted in a confusing identity crisis for Iranians as one of the most devastating impacts, again, touching on the prompt, and that there was also individual, national, and global impacts. And then it combines further more ideas for the contention rather than signposting the arguments with a views and values message. So it's suggesting that conflicts and suffering will continue to arise. That's another argument that as long as there is absolute separatism, so they're separated, or it's people don't know what to choose between the familiarity of Eastern tradition and the freedom offered by Western modernity. So it's signposting that, and that there will be more conflicts and suffering. That's just part of an extension of that contention. And here's the views and values message that Satrapi ultimately concludes and therefore encourages her Western audiences. So this is a views and values statement about the effect that the author is trying to relate to a modern audience, so us, to sympathize with Iranians' painful experience on a humanitarian level, rather than fearfully judge an entire nation by the wrongdoings of a few extremists, because they don't represent the culture and the people. Beautiful. So now in terms of your body paragraphs, we all know teal. I'm sure there is no problem here. Topic sentence, evidence analyze, and a linking sentence, views and values to close. And it's not just a basic structure that's used by people who do not understand. You have been learning it for English for a long time because it actually works. Remember before I said treat English like maths. So use this and use teal. Um, you don't want to risk not using a good structure. Do use the structure and set yourself above the state by having complex analysis and content and vocabulary in there. You're not going to become a high scoring student just because you're doing your own structure instead of teal. So I want you to stick very closely to teal structure. Of course, add views and values in additionally somewhere else in the body paragraph. Remember how I mentioned that. Um, and this is what you should aim for. So your topic sentences form your sub arguments as we discussed. That has to coincide with the outline of arguments or that extended contention that you do in your intro. All have to be reworded. Make sure it's not always just about using synonyms, because that's what a low level student can do. They can just use synonyms to reword it, but it's also about what are different ways I can express that idea, what are ways I can talk around that idea, potentially just using different words, a different statement. So make sure that you practice that when you do plans. And we've seen some great examples of plans today that you can use to guide you from these slides. Make sure they're relevant to your prompt and you have addressed all of the keywords in the prompt. If you don't, you won't get very high marks. So treat planning seriously. Don't put quotes, no evidence in your arguments, no character names as well. You can use the word characters or mention a character group, but we don't want to see character names. Remember that a topic sentence is an argument, is an idea, and not just a statement, something that you can prove in the rest of your body paragraph. So your assessor should be able to read your argument and think, okay, tell me how. I understand what your idea is. Tell me how you would justify it using evidence and analysis. Vika will look closely at your topic sentences and judge them and consider how good they are. So there is a lot of pressure here. So try to write really strong arguments, guys. This is something to practice if you struggle. An explanation of what our topic sentences versus concluding sentences should look like. They are connected. So your topic sentence says, "This is my key idea." And your concluding sentence should be saying, basically, in a nutshell, this is what the author says about the idea that I presented in my topic sentence. This is their message with regards to what my argument is. Seeing an example of that, although some characters seek to overcome their social disadvantages, Many of them struggle to improve their lives in the face of prejudice. Thus, the text reveals the perilous and often emotionally taxing journey the characters must undertake before being able to triumph over society's expectations. So, you want to be able to connect your topic sentence with your concluding sentence. Okay, I've established that it is difficult for characters to overcome their social disadvantages. Thus, the author's message is that it's potentially possible, but it is extremely difficult. And that's the whole journey that they undertake. So this is your opportunity in the concluding sentence to discuss authorial intent. So try to close your body paragraphs in as much of an impressive way as you possibly can, but it should link into your topic sentence because these statements are important and the assessor will look here for something good. Um, Looking at an example of body paragraph essay structure as well, in this case. I'm run through and through with disaster. I am knifed to the hilt with fate from burial rites. To what extent is Agnes responsible for her own suffering? So we have a topic sentence that gives us a clear idea, can contrast the archival documents in the novel with rich, saga-like imagery and symbolism to reinforce the challenges placed upon Agnes. To establish, we're using different words to say this, but yes, Agnes is suffering, and that there are external forces for this because there's imagery and documents. So I said don't mention specific examples in your topic sentences, right? But this is apparently in response to a structural features prompt. And in a structural features prompt, you do want to signpost your main structural features that you will be using. And it's the only exception, really. And then we close with an authorial intent statement about the idea that hence, by contrasting the sterile epigraphs with Agnes's first person narration, again, because it's a structural prompt, we're using all of that meta language and signposting what we've discussed, can prompt for readers to feel that Agnes's fate was largely due to outside societal influences, things that she could not control. And that's a message for us as well. We can't control anything in our lives, of course, and that's what the author is saying, that there are things that happen outside of our control. And we see the evidence that was used to substantiate this interpretation and justify it, that there is nature representing Agnes's suffering, and nature is a powerful external force as well. So if nature is showing her suffering, it then makes sense that it's not internal forces. It's supposed to symbolize that it's not internal forces, it's external forces causing her suffering. So the wind is screaming and screaming for her. It's a metaphorical voice for her. She's mimicking the wind's loneliness. And we see the documents, the historical documents, and they describe, relate to Agnes's experiences and how these were caused by external forces as well. Note how there is an abundance of quotes, even in this short little body paragraph. They're short and sharp, they're integrated beautifully into the sentences, and they're combined and analyzed together as one. Really, there are only two main bits of evidence that were used in this entire paragraph, but because quotes were combined and analyzed together, we satisfy the criteria for quotes and we hit so many points, and we can therefore have more analysis and less time wasted just introducing and explaining evidence. There's also discussion of structural features. There is tons. We see all of the meta language being highlighted here. Feel free to take some of these words if you really like them and put them in your own writing if you think it is relevant to your text. And lastly, conclusions. So this should be a straightforward wrap up of your entire essay. We're looking at, for instance, 3 sentences, maybe maximum 4 sentences. So firstly, we need a restated contention that we would like not to reword from the introduction. So because by this time you've explored the topic in a lot of detail, so your contention can be more refined and specific. So your contention can be much more developed and have new ideas in there based on everything and all of what you've discussed throughout your body paragraphs. And lastly, closing with a message of the text, and we want to make it something impressive because this is the last thing that your assessors will read, and this is what they will remember and will affect your marking if this is something weak. So make sure you end on a strong, impactful note, and you can ask yourself questions to help you come up with more ideas here. What is the author aiming to teach with regards to the prompt? How are they trying to challenge readers? What do they want modern audiences to notice, or those audiences in the past of when the text was first published, for instance? So, how do you study for text response? And this is relevant for your comparatives as well. You could say this is for both sections. Don't make the mistakes listed in the examiner's reports. Based on your current study design, which has been around for a long time since 2017, you need to really read all of the examiner's reports. This will not take you that long. It's a passive way of studying, so it's nice and fun because you're not actually actively writing anything. Look for feedback points and feedback points that apply to you, things that you do that assessors don't want you to do, and strengths that you have that assessors want you to have. Make a note of those things. Make notes of the feedback. At the same time, read the exemplar essays. Take sentence structures, take vocabulary from them that you like, and put it in your own writing. Try to replicate how these students wrote, because you need to understand that a lot of high scoring students just put extensive research into how to write an impressive essay. They don't write like this naturally. It's just work that they put into find vocabulary, find sentence structures, find interesting and impressive ways to write, and replicate it, and you can do the same. Read critical articles, and if you want to stand out, don't just use the basic ones that everyone uses, your Schmoop or Sparks Notes. You need to get less obvious evidence. So try Google Scholar, try to look up the State Library website. Um, and look for critical articles about your text to develop further analytical ideas and interpretations. And similarly, you really need to develop strong interpretations. You need clear understanding of all of the messages of the text, because if you don't have a strong, definitive interpretation, you will not have well-developed discussion of authorial intent that you need for a high-scoring essay. So have strong, definitive opinions and lots of evidence and ideas to supplement them, and add analysis into your quote banks. This helps you practice essay writing at the same time, finding quote structural features and doing mini dot point analysis of all of those. And you will start to associate the quotes and the evidence that you've put down on the paper with the analysis, and you will start to remember the evidence without having to rote learn it for your exam. So when planning um, for uh, for writing time when that's about to start, this is what you should be doing on the exam for text response. So pick the topic you would like to do at the beginning of reading time for section A. Then decide on your main contention, what's going to be your response to the prompt. And as soon as reading time is up, before you go straight to section C and write your argument analysis, which is the first section you should be doing because that's where the article is, write down just your contention. You can jot down a plan of the essay, short main argument ideas. However, this will take up too much of your time, and I recommend just having a contention and then going to section C. Do the same thing for section B. Pick the prompt during planning time and plan a contention. Jot that down when writing time starts. And then you've jotted that down for section A and section B, return to section C and start doing your analyzing argument essay. Wonderful. So just again, the most important things we discussed, my suggested structure to you, what not to do as well. We've already discussed. This is just a reminder. And we're going to jump into comparing text and your comparative essays now. Wonderful. So your criteria for your comparative essays. We need to see that you can showcase knowledge and understanding of both texts, equally discussing them and the ideas and issues they present. Same things, analysis, interpretations, views and values, looking for something new, discussion of meaningful connections, similarities, or differences between the text in response to the topic. So this is how this task is really different from your text response, because you need to make subtle, more complex, interesting links, especially based on differences between your text. And that can be about, the language, that can be about the ideas, that can be your views and values messages, even the arguments that you make, your topic sentences can have a comparative aspect to them, saying this is the both texts do something. That's based on the similarity, right? But if you say text A does this whilst text B does something else for your argument, that is a difference-based topic sentence. Using textual evidence to support your comparative analysis, and again, control and effectiveness of language use. We see that one again. So you need to be capable of analyzing the text in isolation, both figuratively and literally. So we don't want to see that you just compare between the two texts, and you need to substantially and meaningfully analyze them in isolation before you discuss similarities and differences. So just like text response, we need to make sure that you do not forget to incorporate authorial intent, that you focus on your structural features and not just the characters, themes, plot, story, dialogue, etc. Though those things are also important, and you will have them in your discussion. And whenever you provide evidence, it needs to be analyzed, not summarized, not explained, but analyzed as well. So as you know, as you can see, one of the main structures that students use, the block structure, where you discuss a first text, then link into the second text, is a great structure to do for this task because you do need to analyze the text in isolation as well. So consider that this might be a bit more difficult to do with the rainbow structure, and you need to be a skilled student if you switch between text to make sure, if you switch between text constantly, to be able to make sure that you do analyze them sufficiently in separation. You should also be making frequent and relevant links between the two texts. So remember to highlight both similarities and differences as well. And don't simply conflate the two texts. Show that you understand the nuances. We do not want to see just a bunch of similarities. You will unavoidably have them. Look for lots of differences and complex differences. So slight differences in the message or meaning of things like themes, quotes, characters. For instance, we see a sentence frame here to guide you. Whilst text A presents a certain theme, idea, or character in this slide, text B places more importance on something else. Even though they do both present that theme, idea, or character, one of the texts places more emphasis on something slightly different. So only by challenging everything will you get higher marks in the comparative. So really try to achieve this. So having a look at highlighting both similarities and differences. For instance, if we have a prompt about the theme of escape, some topic sentences that we could have in both Stasseland and 1984, in both of our texts, citizens seek freedom from totalitarian regimes. In Stasseland, the Germans must escape from east to west, where they are free from oppression and control. And here is a difference. In 1984, the only way to escape is to dismantle or break down the regime itself, because escaping, physically escaping Oceania, does not necessarily mean achieving freedom, because it cannot be internal freedom. Wonderful. So if you're trying to make sure your links between texts, your comparative links are effective and relevant, you want to aim to compare not only how the texts are different or are similar in how they explore an idea, but also similarities and differences in the structural features of a text. So it can be helpful to note on structural features, as it shows your teachers you have a nuanced understanding of the way in which a text is actually constructed. So you want to compare structural features as well, basically meaning to compare language. And this will be especially pertinent and easy to do because both of your texts are in different genres. So you might be doing a novel and a play, you might be doing a film and a novel. So there's inevitably going to be differences in structural features. So red works well with blue. Use this table to help guide you, and you can use it as a bit of a cheat sheet on how to make strong links. These comparative links offer an opportunity for you to have links that incorporate a similarity and a difference as a two-in-one sentence to make you hit those comparative points. So say if we're looking for a point of similarity in the language, we will combine this with a point of difference in the argument. So we might say there's been a similar language or a similar structural feature that was used in both texts. However, the idea that they present is slightly different. Or we might take a point of similarity in the argument with a point of difference in the language. So we might say that although the argument or idea present in both texts is similar, there are different structural features or language or devices that present this idea. So there's different ways that language is employed in order to construct that effect. So look for those nuances, and this will keep you on track to making nuance links. So differences in ideas or message is where most of your comparative marks will be. These are the most valuable links to make that your assessors will love. So really try to look for these and make them nuanced, more complex, so less obvious differences. Um, this shows really, if you make a lot of these, that you have a really good understanding of what the task actually wants you to do, of what the comparative essay wants you to do, and you don't just do the easy stuff like just analyze language, just analyze how ideas and messages are similar, especially in your closing sentences at the end of each paragraph. When you make your views and values statements, try to make these based around differences rather than similarities. Look for a layer of complexity in what message ultimately authors are trying to convey rather than just looking for similarities. Similarly, with use of evidence, it's really important to discuss in essays. We don't just want you to be relying on characters, quotes, events, and remember your structural features such as genre, foreshadowing, symbols, archetypes is a bit of a list here for you guys to look for structural features. But there's much more to add to this list and all of your different genre features as well. You need to make sure that when you make comparative links to the other text, that these transitions are smooth and relevant. So in this one, this is an example of a bad one. In A Doll's House, Nora and Torvald not only partake in, but embroider and amplify their own unspoken game based on unwritten rules established by society. In Pride and Prejudice, women were expected to exhibit unostentatious behavior. So notice how it just goes from one text to the other without making really any transition. Um, so we need to fix this. Let's have a look at a better example. So the first sentence is the same. We're going to make it clear, though, that this is a similarity and link that into the second text. So such unuttered societal games of romance and social climbing also manifest themselves in Pride and Prejudice, our second text, because women were expected to exhibit unostentatious behavior. And maybe I think you might need some of these defined. The word unostentatious is unpretentious, complies with social norms. Unostentatious, that's what that means. Great word as well. And I've got a cheat sheet for you guys with lots of linking sentence examples to help you make those nuanced links and have great sentence frames to put in your essays. I see a lot of students and students that I tutor as well just not being able to make links that are that great, having sentences that are a bit plain, kind of just saying something is similar or something is different without structuring it nicely or making it offer any level of nuance or complexity. So you may use these sentence frames to try to keep you on track to present more complex ideas rather than just stating the obvious and not structuring it very nicely. So feel free to use these. And I have even more, of course, across two different pages. One that page was for ideas message. This one's for structural features. I really like this one. This is an example of a nuanced link. Although both texts employ a certain structural feature, they use it for different reasons, different ideas to be presented. Text B uses it to establish X, while text A emphasizes Y, so something else. Wonderful. Let's have a look at structure. So similarly, your structure is very similar, except both texts need to be introduced. Not just one text, but both texts need to be introduced for your comparative, and both of their contexts, their socio-political context, also need to be introduced in your intro to then link into the prompt in those broad sentences. And we similarly also need a contingent statement and a signpost of all of the arguments of your body paragraphs, or again, my preference, an extension of your contention. Then, closing with a views and values discussion which should be comparative. Again, try to incorporate as many differences as you can rather than making these statements of authorial intent similarity focused. So, an example introduction. In both The Crucible and Year of Wonders, the atmosphere of the communities of Salem and Aeam respectively have a profound effect on the characters' beliefs and actions. Nice broad opening sentence that's applicable to both texts. This could be improved by it kind of needs the author's full names and mentioning the text type and genre of each text as well before introducing the title. And you can make the context more comparative as well by establishing a bit more clearly how exactly the context differs of the text. Because this one is really vague and is saying the atmosphere is really similar. I would like it to be just a little bit more specific. Both texts examine the effects of tension and paranoia amongst communities as a similarity, and this is our contention, and both showcase the extent to which innocent and misunderstood individuals are impacted by a community's mob mentality and hysteria. Again, another similarity based aspect of our contention. So far we have two similarities suggesting that our body paragraphs will focus around these ideas. And this is where we add a layer of complexity. However, where the Crucible uses this to explore questions of justice and partiality and how individuals shape communities, I have a different views and values message or authorial intent statement for my other text, Year of Wonders, that it instead highlights the role that communities play in shaping individuals on their own journeys of personal growth. So we introduced a link based on the difference for our views and values there. Body paragraphs we had a bit of a chat about, but having a look at an example conclusion, again, because this is really similar to text response, you will also be restating your contention for both texts, but this needs to be comparative. So introduce some ideas, hopefully, to add a level of complexity to your conclusion about how your main arguments for the two texts slightly differ. So try to bring in at least one main difference and state it to improve your conclusions. And then we see a succinct discussion of the comparison of views and values, what both offers messages are. Again, this can be similarity based or differences based. Similarly, leave your best idea for last and try to stick it in here. So, again, in response to 1984 and Stasselin, and the prompt is that they show that knowledge is power. So, our restated contention is that both Stasselin and 1984 suggest we're signposting that this is a similarity in contention, that knowledge is a fundamental and intrinsic part of power, as it cannot exist without knowledge. While it is true that knowledge can be held without exercising it in some external displays of power, both offers reveal that it always shapes the person who holds it in ways both subtle and direct. So far, all similarity based. Again, you can see it's an extended discussion of the contention, but it could use that added some kind of difference to be identified here before moving into the message. So ultimately, both texts showcase the potent nature of knowledge as well as its propensity to be used as a tool for both perpetuating and undermining established power structures. And this is our views and values message, again, similarity space. So we could really use a difference link in here. And I recommend where we are restating our contention to have some kind of difference link there. So overall, my advice for comparatives is that, again, if you're looking to score highly, you still need to address all of those four elements that we discussed for text response, remembering back to that pyramid with structural features at the bottom. You also need to make sure that you integrate and blend quotes into your sentences and they flow smoothly and nicely. And this is something to practice if you struggle. Focus on structural features and genre specific devices. It's another great point of comparison for you rather than just characters and plot of the text. Analyze authorial intent again as much as possible. I mentioned if you're using the block structure, a great place to stick in that second views and values analysis is at the end of your discussion of text A before you make a comparative link to text B to then also analyze text B. And you can also just try to scatter more comparative points throughout. Um, Comparing every single paragraph, this needs to be there, and try to incorporate differences rather than just having a go at similarities all the time. Don't just make simplistic comparisons. Try to find that level of complexity to put in there and look for connections, similarities, and differences between the two texts. Um, so try to look for nuance and complex links to make. So you have to talk about both texts, and generally, this section, as a result, tends to be longer, often about 800 to 1200 words for students, and this is normal. The recommended amount that I would give is more than 1,000 words, and I know that that is a lot, guys. What I used to do is I used to give myself 70 minutes for this section for that reason. Because I found that if I wanted to write a really substantial, really strong essay here, I did need and want a little bit more time. So I do recommend giving yourself some more time, especially analyzing argument is such a short essay section. It's usually under 800 words. Most students probably write about 600 to 800. So I used to get that done in about 45 to 50 minutes, that section. And this allowed me to have that extra time, extra 10 minutes to write a more substantial comparative essay. And this was the strategy that worked for me that you could try to practice when you do a full-time exam. So a couple different structures. There is a block structure and there is a rainbow structure. This is rainbow. And this is a structure hack, and I put up a screenshot here that explains it really, really well so that you memorize exactly how to do the structure. Start with a topic sentence that gives you a broad overview of the key idea from the prompt that you'll be discussing in the paragraph, how it relates to both texts, similar or different. Then you start by outlining the first text and linking your paragraph focus to a broad example. This is when the analysis of the first text starts because you already have a quote or example, and you throw in those quotes to unpack your idea. You need a bit more explanation in the sentence so that you can adequately explore the meaning of the evidence you've just introduced. Then you find a transition, a connecting idea based on a similarity or difference or both that's also evident in the second text, which you will start analyzing now. Jump straight into it with quote, 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 and plenty of explanation. The explanation is important, don't neglect this, and analyze it. And now we go back again with a transition sentence that provides us with another bridge. So you see this go on and on. Read through this. This is a really coherent and easy way that the rainbow structure has been presented, where you consistently switch between text A, text B, back and forth, back and forth. And this is a great structure for including a lot of comparative links. It makes it easier to do than the block structure, but it is a difficult structure to do well. But if you find something like this easy to understand and you can memorize how to do the actual structure, feel free to have a go at the rainbow structure. This is a really good example. So this is that switch. Is it? This is the switch method where it talks about both texts in every body paragraph. So you have a topic sentence based on a similarity or difference across the two texts in terms of your argument. Then you have discussion of your text A. Once you finish it, you want to have that views and values message there about text A before you link into the next text, as per my recommendation. I refer to this as the block structure, not the switch method, and that slightly threw me off. This is the block structure because half of the paragraph is about text A, and the other half of the body paragraph is about text B. So once you finish discussing text A, you make a comparative link sentence based on either a similarity or a difference between the texts. Then you close with a concluding sentence that shows a brief comparison of authors' respective views and values. um, so this is where you have that views and values analysis that's hopefully comparative basis as well. So like this mentions a really good thing that you've already discussed text A and analyzed it when you're discussing text B. So it's quite easy to find more comparative links based on what you have already analyzed in text A and mention that certain things are a similarity or a difference, bring in even more of that. So try to have a go at this. to include more comparative links. And we see an example of a switch method. We see a topic sentence based on a similarity, thus confined within these norms, men overtly reject feminine tendencies and their perverse desires. Then we see a discussion of text one. It's a bit of evidence from, is it from Frankenstein? Yes, it is. A little bit of evidence and analysis from Frankenstein, analyzed in not extensive detail, but just enough to really establish those key ideas about our argument. And we see a views and values message that we close discussion of text A with before we move on to text B. As such, Shelley, our author, asserts that the barbarity of man is innately linked with their ego that renders men unsympathetic towards the gravity or the consequences of their actions. And then a linking sentence, likewise, Poe not only reaffirms the blinding arrogance of man, but further explores the self destruction of this character trait. So we've actually linked in a similarity in ideas, and we made it nuanced or complex by saying that there is a slight difference in that idea because Poe explores self destruction of men even further in and brings up different ideas is what we're implying that we're going to analyze. So this is analysis again of our second text. Noticing here, it's not 50-50 like we would want. There's quite a lot more for Poe, but this is not a problem. You can do this in your essays as long as you fix it in your further paragraphs. And similarly, in my next argument, I would just try to have more analysis of Frankenstein and a bit less analysis of Poe to balance it out. Then we have concluding sentences based on views and values. And have a read through this one. It's quite impressive and extensive views and values analysis, and it's even still using some evidence to prove that these messages about primitive nature of man, brutal rejection of the feminine, hubris, and violence dominate the characterization of men. Based on everything that we've already discussed, we did discuss that man was primitive, overt rejection of feminine norms, feminine traits, prideful, and violent. So it's still your concluding sentences in comparing text should still link into your topic sentences or arguments, just like how they did in text response when we looked at that slide and we showed how topic sentence is this is a key idea, and concluding sentence is this is what the authors say about the key idea that I've presented. Beautiful. And this is the rainbow method where I showed you this lovely slide that helps to conceptualize it really well and show how you could do an entire body paragraph on it. So we see that you really just keep linking between text. You analyze something in text one, then you link in that this is either similar or different in text to provide some evidence. You keep doing this until you're satisfied. Then you transition to a different sub idea for that argument because you should have more than one thing that you're trying to prove or justify within the argument. And then you do the same thing, but this time you present evidence and analysis for text 2 first because it's currently being unanalyzed in this first block because only text 1 is being analyzed, and we just say, oh, this is similar or different in text 2, here's the evidence to show that, right? So we don't analyze text 2 in sub idea 1, but in sub idea 2 now we use text 2 as the springboard or the basis, and the evidence or quotes are analyzed for it, and we say, oh, this is similar to something in text 1 or 2, give some quotes for it, but we don't analyze. We go back to text 2 after that, and we keep doing it until we're satisfied. So you would normally have this being done at least twice, potentially a views and values link here in the middle, this being done twice as well to make sure you have adequate and similar amount of discussion for each text, like their individual analysis, and again, close with comparison of views and values. Wonderful. We see an example of this as well, but this is more of a read for you guys. I won't go through it. It's extremely long, but it's very, very well done. It uses the longest memory, which is, I know, a very, very, very common text for your comparatives. So you can pick a lot of vocabulary and ideas that you can use from here. And it does use Black Diggers, which is not on the study design anymore, but it does have some similarities to 7 Stages of Grieving. and is a play also, so you can take some ideas from that as well. And you can see that this literally reflects this in a nutshell. So have a look at the structures. If it's not too late to, if you think you could do better on comparative and you think that you should change the structure that you currently use, and maybe try the rainbow structure or the block structure in contrast to what you're currently doing, you still have some time to attempt this and have a look at how you go. Whatever feels better for you and whatever way you write better is preferred. This is a much shorter example and realistic for a body paragraph on an essay, but at the same time, it doesn't have enough individual analysis of each text separately. It goes quite a lot into links and views and values, um, which means that hopefully for the rest of the essay, the student would be having more isolated analysis of each text separately rather than having so many links, having so many views and value statements, because they are good, but you're still getting marked on isolated analysis of each text. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of each approach, and what should you ultimately use? Well, the switch method allows for in-depth analysis of this single text. This is the block method, I also call it. It makes which text you are discussing at the moment very, very clear, which is often difficult to do in the rainbow method because you have to keep signifying that you're switching between texts. However, if your comparison is a little bit weak in the middle, VCA criteria could not be met. However, the block structure makes sure that, the rainbow method makes sure that you have lots of comparison between the text, because we just looked, you're constantly making links between texts, comparative links. But unfortunately, it can be difficult to make it clear which text you are discussing at the time, and it can reduce the amount of isolated analysis of each text that you have, which is also part of the VCA criteria. So either way, there are disadvantages to using each structure. Similarly, rainbow is also the harder structure to employ. There's no problem with using either structure if you know the advantages and disadvantages of each and you make sure that you overcome these in your own writing. You can absolutely qualify for high marks or full marks or whatever. You can get full marks with both structure types. However, you need to, for example, if you're using the block method, make sure you're adding more and more and more comparative links in your body paragraphs than just that one in the middle, and that the link that you make in the middle when you link to your second text is nuanced, complex, and interesting, and hopefully not similarity based. But if you do want to mention a similarity, it should be a similarity plus a difference as a general rule. So overall, it's easiest for anyone to start out with the switch method and potentially build to rainbow analysis if you are interested in following that structure. And it's also completely fine to stick with the block structure. I had my own, I used to use the block structure as well, and I found it to work really well for me. And I had no problem with it. I just made more comparative links, like I said. And some essay strategies for your comparatives. Try to progress your ideas. This applies to text response as well, actually. So think about, this is in relation to your topic sentences. Your arguments should be building on each other, exploring different perspectives until you've reached the third body paragraph that should represent the more complex idea that you have, such as nuanced views and values of the authors. A really great life hack to doing this is just to isolate the keyword in your prompt and introducing more and more nuanced views and values as the essay progresses so that you have a strong idea to propel your third body paragraph. So we see an example of how those tracks in Charlie's Country explore the effects of isolation. Isolation is that keyword. We are isolating it, and we're going to try to introduce more and more nuanced views and values as our essay progresses. So our first one could be that physical isolation within nature reveals limitations and achievements. So this is our simple argument for agreeing with the prompt. Our second argument, where it's getting a bit more complex, both characters experience a sense of segregation from society, both culturally and physically. And this is where we're bringing in, we're not arguing with ourselves here yet because we wanted to establish different effects of isolation because this was important. But we had a broad argument of around isolation, and then we have a more narrow one that's based around um, individuals and how they may feel segregated or rejected from society. And our most complex link that we're going to try to add those nuanced views and values into is that ultimately isolation of the self allows for reflection and a stronger sense of identity for characters. Beautiful. So that isolation can actually be a good thing, even though it should be a devastating force. And that's how we formed our most complex argument by arguing with ourselves and become having this more developed idea. So progressing ideas, again, this is a really good way to visualize it. Um, in this example, compare the ways in which societies of Stasseland and Never Let Me Go seek to control that keyword. So we might say, because it says ways, so we need different ways. Our first argument will be about physical control, our second will be about societal control, and our third will be about psychological control, which will be the most complex. And here we're thinking about the pyramid of the hierarchy of needs and individuals' needs. The most basic needs are physiological and safety. And these are the things that humans really kind of can't live without, especially physiological needs. Safety, more or less, can survive, but it's a very hard life. So, physical control would be impacting this. Societal control could control your esteem and your love and belonging. And this kind of overlaps with psychological control as well. But psychological control would also be with your self actualization, your ability to fulfill your goals and wants and dreams. Um, and we will depict how the societies within these texts affect this hierarchy of needs and how that makes people feel very bad and very controlled. What kind of impact does it lead to? Um, so, another way to do this idea progression is by telling a story with your body paragraphs, building your ideas until you breach the crux or the key point of your essay or interpretation. Having a look at this example, although there is much despair in the crucible and year of wonders, there is also cause for hope. Discuss. So, we might start by establishing that both AM and Salem strive to retain a sense of hope in the community. They try to keep it there. However, they fail to preserve hope, leading to chaos and despair when this fails. So, this is more complex because it's touching on the implications of hope being lost. And lastly, however, personal hope prevails for some of the individual characters, so it can still be retained by some very powerful characters. And this is going to be our most complex argument that hope does not disappear for everyone. Another way to conceptualize how you guys want to build your arguments, organizing your ideas so that they build off each other, so that those little paragraph summaries of each topic sentence that I gave you and how you could structure. This is a similar way. It's just saying the same thing, so don't stress about it. That idea one is your simple argument, your main perspective, just building directly from your contention. Idea two builds on idea one and argues with idea one and presents something more nuanced. And idea three is your most complex argument, often your counter argument, the point that can only be made because of what you've already established in one and two. Beautiful. Hopefully, you guys have been finding this really helpful. We'll lastly look at analyzing argument. So, your Section C criteria, you're assessed on your understanding of arguments presented and points of views expressed, analysis of ways in which language and visual features are used to present an argument and to persuade. So, this reminds you that you need to be able to identify PLTs, more subtle, again, complex PLTs as well, analyze them in a really hopefully more complex manner. So being really good at the what, how, why process and being able to find the author's arguments and contention, their main argument within the text, and identify these is what you're going to be mostly assessed on. And then, of course, control and effectiveness of language use. As always, we see that one every single time. So contentions have to include quite a bit of information in order for a contention statement that goes in your intro to be good. So a good contention, you should really memorize this, should mention what the issue of the piece is, how the writer approaches their argument. So tone, the main tone, yes, there will be tonal shifts, but the main tone that you see throughout the piece, and you can just use an adjective that represents a tone word plus add the word ending ly here. Whether the writer sees the issue as good or bad, where you will use a much stronger adjective to describe that. What is their main reason for thinking it's good or bad? And therefore, what do they propose should be done? And it could be more simple things, just like raising awareness. They may not have a specific solution, but basically what they want to be done. Even if this is implied and it's not actually stated, you need to identify the solution. So this is your potential contention format, and try to use it because you don't want to miss any of these things: the tone, the issue, whether it's good or bad, why, and the solution, because all of these elements really should be in your contention. Additionally, if you dislike having an entire sentence dedicated to your audience as your last sentence of your introduction, try to mention the name of the audience group that you've identified within your contention as well. Otherwise, you still need to mention audience in your intro, and it will have to go in a final sentence in your introduction where you specify what the audience is. So let's have a look at a contention. This is a letter to the editor. You can uh, identify it, that it is because it has a subheading. It's a short colloquial piece. It's signed off by a specific person and their location, which suburb they're from. So it's about Australia Day, which is always a relevant issue. Let us find a more inclusive date. What does Australia Day mean to me? Hoons tearing around in their bright blue utes, with the Australian flag draped across their shoulders, loudly voicing their patriotism. Ask any of them about Australia's original inhabitants and be met with a blank stare. Isn't it time that we considered a more inclusive date? Already thinking about what is the issue? Australia Day. What is the author's perspective? Negative. Australia Day is Invasion Day. That is the reason why they think Australia Day should not exist. And what do they propose they do? Is that we should have a more inclusive date for Australia Day that does not overlap with Invasion Day. Nice and easy to find, but you should be able to do this with a long article as well. And then think about what persuasive language techniques do you mainly see? I see a lot of negative language, a lot of attacking language. I see rhetorical questions. I see listing, um, language with negative connotations. It's obviously a short piece, but those are the main things that I see. So this is our contention flowchart, and we're going to follow it to craft our contention, imagining that we were going to write a body paragraph on this short letter to the editor. So we're going to say that Choi contends that changing the date of Australia Day is appropriate. So it mentions the issue Australia Day, and that Australia Day is basically inappropriate, but it's saying that changing it would be appropriate, which is the same thing. So good or bad, tick. We've done that because it fails to recognize the historical implications for Indigenous Australians. And this is our main reason. Why is the issue good or bad? This is the author's main reason of why Australia Day should be changed. Instead, she argues the date must be changed to include all Australians. That is the solution. So we've ticked everything off. Wonderful. You can absolutely split your contention into two sentences as well if you so wish. Wonderful. Flashback, just read it again. Not going to go through it. You can on the broadcast go back to the beginning when I ran through the what, how, why process, but we will look at examples of each step being done. So let's have a look at the what. This is where we're saying, what is the author doing? What is the persuasive language technique or the language being used? What's the quote for that? And how do we explain it? So we can link in that explanation into analysis of either the how or the why. So the author makes use of overtly negative language, such as terrible human being, to establish Chris Brown in an unfavorable light. By describing his actions as brawling with a crew, the author employs language reminiscent of gang violence and brutal street fights. The author employs language that plays to the idea of naivety and youthfulness through describing Brown as a stupid 19-year-old kid. So these are several examples, 3 different examples, and it was on a Chris Brown article. Overtly negative language. Example of that. What is it intending to do? Establish him in a bad light, that he has negative qualities. The description of his actions has negative connotations. But if we say something has positive or negative connotations, we need to explain it. So we're indicating that these connotations are negative because they remind us of gang violence and brutal street fights. They would be associated with those things. And language that plays to the idea of naivety and youthfulness. End quote. Wonderful. Now, in the how stage, we are answering how the audience is being positioned, and it is intended effect, not actual effect on the audience. We don't actually know how the audience would react, so make sure you use low modality language like may, could, suggest, indicates, invites, aims to, tries to incite feelings of, not saying, oh, the author successfully does this, or the author is trying to do this specific thing, because we cannot be definitive. So try not to conduct any fence sitting, and be really careful with the language that you use. And this is where you want to look for some vocabulary for your intended effect sentences and some sentence frames, so that you have lots of ways to conduct this analysis without repeating yourself and saying intended effects all the time, because this will be a significant proportion of your essays. So let's look at some examples. Thus, the author invites readers to consider how their support of Brown might endorse his harmful behavior. So she wants them to think that by supporting him, it will make his actions worse. Remember, intended effect is how are we making the audience think, what are we making them feel or do. It could also, we could say, it encourages them not to support him in general. But in this case, it's to make them think something. For which the author seeks to engender a sense of fear amongst her readership of the misogynistic behavior that Brown could inflict in Australia. So the author is, the intended effect is trying to make the audience feel fear, feel scared of Brown potentially coming and causing more havoc in Australia by performing there. Which seeks to marginalize readers against her proposition by way of implying that they fail to uphold the principles of gender equality. So it serves to exclude people who support Brown. Wonderful. So, to elaborate further on what I said about not sounding too definitive with the language that you use here and being really careful, you need to look at how the author intends or wants to make readers think, feel, or do, rather than what they actually think or feel, because we cannot make any judgment here, and you are just one member of the audience. You're just one reader. So be really careful with the language. So what not to do. This persuasive language technique makes the reader feel sad, and what to do. This PLT is intended to elicit feelings of sadness. So it tries to, or positions readers to feel sad. It tries to position them that way, right? So don't evaluate the strength or the merits or the effectiveness of the author's arguments and the language that they use and the PLTs that they use. Now, the why stage is where we link back basically how is this evidence convincing? How does it support the author's argument or contention? As such, the author creates a comprehensively negative image of Brown, furthering the idea that he should not be allowed into Australia because it's a negative image. It just increases the idea that he should not be allowed. Or thus, the author seeks to inspire a unity amongst her readers to ensure they all criticize how celebrities get a free pass when it comes to misdemeanors. So, encouraging people to criticize people like Brown. And understand that celebrities are people like us and they should not get special treatment. And reduce the importance of Brown. Another example. Wonderful. Having a look at an example, what not to do. The author appeals to nostalgia in order to inspire audiences to support her contention. This aims to do the what, and the how, and the why, but really doesn't really say anything. And some students will write like this. So we need to make sure we thoroughly include each step of the what, how, why process. We don't even know how the author appeals to nostalgia. Where's the evidence? What is it inspiring audiences to do? Question mark. And how does nostalgia support her contention? It's not explained. We need to be specific. Never be vague in analyzing argument. You need to give specific ideas. So we could say that the appeal to nostalgia or the nostalgic tone is prompting us to reminisce the past happy memories that we had. This is what's inspiring us, okay? And that it's going to lead to the urge to preserve such memories by supporting the author's contention. So, an analysis of that looks like this. The author begins with a nostalgic tone, and we would introduce a quote here, but this is obviously fictional, which is designed to prompt our audience to reminisce the past and picture the happy memories of their childhood at the local park. Nice and specific. That's the intended effect analysis. And in doing so, this is the why, she urges the community to see that in an attempt to preserve such memories, they should not demolish the local park, so that to prevent that action from being taken, so that they can preserve those happy memories. So ultimately, your task is to analyze how the language, visual and written, your visual material and all of the text, you want to try to cover all of it, but only choose the most relevant PLTs to analyze. How these choices shape meaning and argument. So this is your what, how, why process, and how it positions the audience. And in what way is that being done, and what is the reason? What is the author trying to do? So what is wrong with this example? The author uses a variety of persuasive devices to show that plastic supermarket toys are bad. She says that the objects are no doubt a 7-day wonder, which makes readers agree with her contention. We do not want to see anything like agree with contention. Make sure this is excluded from your essays. There are lots of simple words like show, bad, and says. In general, words such as show, make, and says we should never see in any essay in English. Find substitutes for these words: show, make, and says. It's way too broad, in particular, our first sentence. Um, what persuasive devices? Choose something specific and state it. The quote isn't being analyzed at all, which we know if we have evidence, it needs to be analyzed, and never say that statement. So, how do we improve it and rewrite it? Let's say the author ardently condemns, because that's what the quote is doing, it's condemning that they're a 7-day wonder, plastic supermarket toys, through her description of the promotional toys as mere objects. Simple, nice and simple quote. And we've already explained this evidence by saying that it's being condemned, and it's because of that description. So, the language of objects carries connotations of worthlessness. So, negative connotations associated with worthlessness, being specific, not just saying negative or positive, stripping them of personality, which attempts to make the reader disregard their value. So, we've analyzed intended effect on the reader, that they're worthless. They're going to make them think that the toys are worthless. In doing this, the author seeks to change her parental audience to avoid collecting the toys. And that's our analysis of the why. Really nice and simple here, though, because it's just some plain evidence. Hopefully, you can write something more complex working with an actual article. So look for subtle PLTs. Like I said, don't just analyze the simple, obvious things like statistical evidence, expert evidence, a simile, an anecdote. Look for the complexities as well, and try to analyze them where you can. So connotations associated with the language, not just positive or negative, but identifying them more specifically. And we've seen several examples today. You can use words like connotations associated with, stick in specific descriptors rather than positive or negative. And even nouns can fit in there. How the argument is being framed, which is called prolepsis. Sentence structure. You can analyze the structure of the piece itself. You can analyze high and low modality verbs being used, parallels, associations, juxtapositions, shifts in tone. And I think everyone can find this. So absolutely analyze any shift in tone that you can find. And these are some of ideas for you guys, but this is not an extensive list. And when you analyze a visual, remember that they all need to be analyzed. If there is a visual, you need to analyze it. And it doesn't get its own separate body paragraph if it's embedded within the text, meaning it's not comparative, it's part of the author's argument. Decide which argument it belongs to and find an appropriate area within your body paragraph to bring in the visual, analyze it, move on, and keep analyzing the actual text or close the body paragraph depending where the visual is. If it's at the end of the argument, once you finish analyzing one or two things in the visual that you've chosen, you will have your linking sentence and you will close that paragraph. So find a gateway where it seems appropriate. And oftentimes it's quite chronological. So usually you finish discussing evidence somewhere just before the visual actually starts, and you might just introduce the visual right after that evidence because it's an appropriate area, and it's quite chronological. So you need to describe what the visual is literally depicting. What do you literally see in the visual overall? Think foreground, background, central object. What is it showing? The embedded photograph depicts blah, blah, blah. Sentence done, closed, and that's how you introduce the visual. You can use the word embedded to make it more flowy to show that, oh, this is not a new paragraph, this is still part of the same argument that I'm talking about. Consider the symbolic meaning of the visual. Find 1 to 2 things to analyze. So size, scale, color, symbols, um, expressions, anything that is relevant, and analyze it just by applying the what, how, why process, except you will not have a quote unless it's a caption. You will just explain, oh, well, if I'm saying it's a symbol that I'm analyzing, explain where the symbol is and analyze it using the what, how, why process. Again, quite an extensive list here. I mean, this is most of the things that you'd be analyzing in a visual, things that you can analyze. Only choose 1 to 2 things because you want to move on from your visual, but never leave them unanalyzed. Have a go at a practice task if you like. There are some quite relevant things to analyze here. The writing on the board, the expression of the teacher, expressions of the students, the speech of the student, the sign is symbolic, and this is an example of a comic uh, drawing in terms of the visual type, because you do need to, when you first introduce the visual, you do need to, as part of part one, also say the visual type. So it might be a caricature, it might be a cartoon, it might be a photograph or an illustration. Usually those ones are the most common. And lastly, we'll talk about a little bit about exam prep, just a little bit. So I said not to use shows, says, makes because they're very non-specific, super overused by students. Here are replacements you can add to this list. Replace all of these words with anything else and make it as specific as possible. So this is a bit of a vocabulary list for you guys. Now, some common mistakes that I want you guys to avoid, and this is for analyzing argument. When your analysis focuses just on listing persuasive language techniques or even bringing them into a topic sentence, your argument, don't do that. Be nice and specific and explaining everything. Empty analysis, that's just textbook phrases or definitions to describe effects rather than injecting relevance and specificity by considering your specific issue and your specific article. You can relate your analysis of PLTs back to the audience, back to the argument, to the contention, to the issue itself. And we need to see this being done every single time, being as specific as possible. You can get creative with how you analyze PLTs and feel free to. I always got such high marks for analyzing argument just because if I didn't know how to analyze something, I'd come up with something creative. And as long as I justified that well enough, that would even look impressive. And the assessor would go, yeah, that's really cool. So don't be afraid to be creative in this section and practice developing ideas. Paraphrasing what the author is saying rather than actually analyzing and explaining what the author is saying, and the persuasive language technique. Being very careful of these things. And for English overall, to maximize your marks, try to go beyond the scopes of your text, both for text response and comparative, and discuss author's views and values and oral intent. Remember, I said 2 times per body paragraph. On top of that, for your intro and conclusion, also as your concluding sentences, use intent verbs. So your writer does words at all times, and use a lot of meta language. Try to pick up some elevated vocabulary, such as text-specific vocabulary for your text, names of structural features, context-specific vocabulary, and so on and so forth. Prompt breakdowns should address the complexity of the prompt and follow the suggested format that I've given you for planning your arguments, for them to not be boring and for them to have that progression of ideas and be really nice and elevated. Draw on the implications of your prompt. Ask yourself, okay, if so, then what? Why is this important? What are the consequences of what this prompt is suggesting? And analyze structural features, not just plot and characters, and aim to be really specific with your analysis. So guys, with exams approaching, try to decide how much study you will devote to the English versus your other subjects and try to prevent being burnt out. Don't always write essays. If you're not in an English mood, there's other things you can do. Reread and feedback your old essays and get ideas from them. Make those quote banks. those mini analysis points and those summary notes. Make cue cards if you would like, go through past exams, do prompt plans, um, practice analyzing argument tasks from past exams. Like there's so many ideas of ways to break up your study and still be really effective with it. Not everyone will benefit from writing 100 essays. Probably no one will after a while. You want to do those shorter tasks as well to supplement your essay writing for it to get better at the same time. um, Change up your routine and try those different things and find ways of studying that are not only more fun for you but very effective. Find what you need to improve on and work on those specific areas of weakness through all of the things that I've discussed, and hold yourself accountable so you actually feel prepared for the exam. If you're cramming quotes the night before, I've got bad news for you. And if your study score comes back looking like not what you wanted, you will be disappointed in yourself. So try to study at this point as much as you possibly can until you feel prepared. I know you need a study score of 30 or 35 in English, depends which uni course you're applying to, generally, to be able to get into a course unless you got in through like early entry. So there is a lot of pressure to do at least average, right? For a lot of students that want to go to uni right after. So really study for the subject, get extra help and support if you need it as well. Um, do everything you can to make sure that you succeed in getting the study score that you're aiming for. And prevent burnout. Don't study if you're tired or stressed. Give yourself some time to relax. It is really important you don't get burnt out with your exams approaching and then still experience burnout during your exams. Um, Application is key, so you still need to write essays, body paragraphs, etc. There's only so much you can do with the shorter exercises once you've done many of them. And be proactive and get that feedback and help from your teacher finally. So thank you everyone so much for coming along to this lecture. I hope that you found it really, really helpful. I do want to wish you guys best of luck on your English exam. I know you've got this. Just believe in yourself, put in the time and practice, and you will do well in this subject. Thank you everyone for coming along.